Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. I am Dr. Jishnu Bhattacharya, an Associate Professor in Mechanical Engineering Department, IIT Kanpur. Today, I am going to take a tutorial on classical thermodynamics for engineers, and I am going to follow the book of Cengel and Bowles. As you see here, please follow my cursor so that I can point to the portion I am talking about. Okay, so this is a book by Cengel and Bowles, which is the undergraduate level thermodynamics book for the engineers, and this is the book we follow at IIT Kanpur for UG thermodynamics teaching. Okay, so this tutorial we will see that few problems we will take from couple of chapters, and then we will go through the process of solving them step by step with you so that you can follow how to approach a problem, and also we will check basic thermodynamic concepts which will be illuminated through the examples. So the first chapter of the book is, let me zoom this out a little bit. So the first chapter of the book is on introduction and basic concepts. Okay, so here what we are talking about is the energy, few definitions, dimensions, and then what does it mean when we say control volume or a system. Okay, and we will also go through few definitions of density, specific gravity, and all those things. The temperature, concept of temperature, which is based on the zeroth law of thermodynamics, and then pressure, how to measure a pressure through manometer, and other definitions of pressure. So these are the basic concepts chapter which most of you are familiar with from your class 2 level physics knowledge. Okay, so there will be a little bit of recap as well as the engineering application of these concepts. That's the focus of this tutorial. So here we will assume that the theory part or the knowledge part you have already gathered, and we will only apply those knowledge in solving problems. Okay, so that's the purpose of this tutorial session. Okay, so let us take the first problem, which will be on a multi-fluid manometer. Okay, so this is the first problem, and what we are doing here, we are trying to find out the pressure of air which is pressurized by water in a tank, and the pressure we are going to measure through this multi-fluid manometer. Manometer is the pressure measurement device, and multi-fluid, why do we say so? Because we have multiple fluids in this manometric measurement. That's what we are going to see now. Okay, so now you can look at this picture where this multi-fluid barometer is depicted, and here we see that on your left hand side, please again follow my cursor on the screen. So on your left hand side you are seeing a tank which is closed from all the directions, which contains water but partially, and on top of that air is entrapped. Okay, so this is the the air pressure here is the unknown, which we are trying to measure by all this elaborate arrangement. So if we see here that we have a very long tube which is bent multiple times, okay, and this tube is open to the water in the left hand side tank. Okay, so how is this constructed? So up to this level, this height, okay, you see my cursor here. Up to this height, water is filling the tube, and from that point to the point that I am pointing to right now, this portion is filled with another fluid, which is some oil, which is different from water. Okay, and now from this point where the oil column ends starts the liquid mercury column. So you can see we have denoted that with Hg, which is the chemical symbol of mercury, and that mercury column is extending up to point 2, and this whole tube is open to the atmosphere. That means that point 2 will have the atmospheric pressure. Okay, so this is the basic construction of the manometer, and what is to be found out? We need to find out the gauge pressure for air inside the tank. So here the gauge pressure we have to find out, and what is given? We are given with all these different column heights, H1, H2, H3, and different densities. For water, which is 1000 kg per meter cube. For the oil that is getting used here, the density is 850 kg per meter cube, and for mercury it is 13,600 kg per meter cube. So here you see that the important column heights are given here. So H1 is the distance from the top of the water column in the tank, and here in the barometer, the top of the water column in the not barometer but the manometric tube. So this height difference is given as H1, and this point is the junction where the water column and the oil column meets. So from this point, the depth of the oil column in the other part of the manometric tube is given as H2. Okay, and again from the same height where the mercury column starts, the height is given by H3. Okay, so these values are given, the densities are given. Now we have to find out what is the pressure, gauge pressure for air. Okay, so let's see what are the different concepts that we have to use to solve this problem. Okay, so let's introduce what are the major concepts that we are going to use. First is at the same height or depth. Okay, if the column fluid remains the same, then pressure will also be the same. Okay, and the next one is when the depth is increasing, pressure will also increase. So this upside arrow that we are using, that means increases. So when the depth is increasing, pressure is also increasing, and by how much? That will be by rho g h. H is the depth. Okay, and the opposite is also true. When the depth is decreasing, that means depth is decreasing. In that case, the pressure will come down. Okay, that's the basic concept of pressure, and again that will be by rho gh. Okay, the next concept that will need here is the definition of gauge pressure. Gauge pressure is nothing but the absolute pressure minus the atmospheric pressure. Okay, P minus P atmosphere. So if we go to our manometric tube, here these concepts, if we apply, we can see that for this height, okay, so both here as well as here in the tank, they are at the same height. So pressure at this point in the tank will be the same as pressure at this point in the tube. Okay, and similarly, as from this point to this point, we have the same liquid, which is oil. So at the same height, that means where the oil column starts and the other part of the tube at the same height, we will have the same pressure. Okay, so basically at this point and this point, sorry, the pressure will be the same. So here as well as here, the pressure will be the same. Similarly, here as well as here, the pressure will be the same. Okay, and whenever we are going deeper in height or depth, okay, so from here, when we go towards the direction of gravity, the pressure will increase by this rho gh, and here rho will be for water. Okay, and when from here to here we will go, the pressure will decrease because we are now going against the gravity. Okay, so and the pressure will decrease by rho gh3, and this rho will be the rho of mercury, right? So these are the concepts we have introduced, and these that we are going to apply for solving this problem. Okay, so now if we start at point 1, what we can write at point 1, the pressure will be P1. This is absolute pressure, and what we are going to, at the end of the water column, the pressure will be rho of water multiplied by acceleration due to gravity g into h1. Okay, so because h1 we are going deeper, so this is a positive sign. Okay, and again for the oil column also, we are going deeper with respect to the point where the oil column starts. So again we will have a positive sign here, and now to get the pressure increment, we have to use rho of oil because the column is now made of oil. Again rho oil g into h2, and for the next part, for the mercury column, now we are going up, so that is why we have a negative sign here. Okay, and this negative sign tells that we are going up by height h3, and the column is now made of mercury, so we have to use rho of mercury. Okay, and by doing this we reach at point 2, that means the pressure will be P2 there, and as point 2 is open to the atmosphere, so the pressure will be P atmosphere. So this is the basic equation that we are getting, which will give us the point of the entrapped air. Okay, so here in the next line we are writing Pg1, that means the gauge pressure at point 1, which is nothing but the absolute pressure P1 minus the atmospheric pressure P atm. Okay, that means from this equation what we get is rho of mercury into GH3 minus rho of water into GH1 minus rho of oil into GH2. So this is the simple expression that we are getting to get the gauge pressure at point 1. Okay, so now all these values are given, all the densities are given. We know the acceleration due to gravity is 9.81 meter per second square, and we also are given with all the heights h1, h2 and h3. So now it's a simple numerical manipulation where we put all these values. We can take the acceleration due to gravity out, because that's the common term. That's 9.81 meter per second square. And now we write all the rho h terms. Okay, so this is for mercury, that's the density, and this is h3.4 meter, minus this is for water, 1000 kg per meter cube, into h2, that is 0.2 meter, and minus 850 kg per meter cube, which is for oil, and that is multiplied by h2. So ultimately, by one more thing I want to emphasize here is that whenever you write any quantity, please write along with its complete unit, and that too in SI unit, so that you follow a consistent unit system, and that will give you a quantity which will be consistent for that particular unit system. So here you write, I did not write just 9.81, I wrote 9.81 meter per second square. Here also, for all the density terms, I did not just write that number, because and this convention I follow all the time, so that if I make any mistake, that will be caught then and there. Okay, the units will not match, and you will have a not a apple to apple addition or apple to apple subtraction. Okay, so ultimately you can find out a mistake by looking at the consistency of the unit system only. Okay, anyway, so this is the SI unit. So ultimately what you are going to get is the SI unit of pressure, which is Pascal, which is basically Newton per meter square, and you can convert, so that's the number 48900, and you can convert it to more convenient unit, which is kilopascal, 48.9 kilopascal, because kilopascal is a, so approximately atmospheric pressure is 100 kilopascal, so it is about 1.5 atmosphere or 1.5 bar approximately. Okay, the gauge pressure of the air is, entrapped air is 48.9 kilopascal, and the absolute pressure will be, on top of that you have to add the atmospheric pressure. Okay, so that will be approximately 1.5 bar. Okay, so let's go to the next problem. Where we are going to look at we are going to use the similar concepts of this gauge pressure and all, but now with little more involvement than simple manometer. So the problem statement here is, a gas is contained in a vertical frictionless piston cylinder device. The piston has a mass of 3.2 kg, which is given, as well as the cross-sectional area is given to be 35 centimeter. A compressed spring, so that's the complicating part here, that we have something of some extra force. So a compressed spring above the piston exerts a force of 150 Newton. This is given. So you can also follow the diagram which is at the bottom. So if the atmosphere exerts a pressure of 95 kPa, so the top of this is open to the atmosphere as well, and the atmospheric pressure is given to be 95 kPa. So it must be at certain height or at some higher temperature. That's why it is less than 100 kPa. Okay, whatever be the case, the atmospheric pressure is 95 kPa. Now we need to determine the pressure inside the cylinder. What is the PG, gas pressure inside the cylinder? Okay, so this is the problem statement. Let's see how we can solve it. Okay, so here what we require is Let me zoom this little bit. Yeah. So what we require? We require that what would be the force balance for equilibrium conditions. So the piston is not moving, it is staying at its place. That means all the forces acting on it are balanced. So that force balance first we have to solve. Okay, then it's the definition of pressure, which is force divided by area. That's what we are going to use. Okay. So for the force balance, what we need to do is the construction of free body diagram. Free body diagram, we take the portion for which we are trying to do the force balance and look at all the forces that are acting on them, on that particular part. So this is the piston part. We can see at the middle we have this force due to spring, F spring, and on the top surface we have this a distributed force of P atmosphere into the area. So the total force will be P atmosphere and multiplied by the area of the piston. That would be the force acting downwards. Okay. Another force acting downward would be the weight of the piston, mass of which is given, and we know the acceleration due to gravity. Okay, another force which will be exerted by the gas inside the cylinder, and that would be Pg, that means the gas pressure into the area. Both this area and that area are equal. Okay, so what we see here, there are 3 downward forces and 1 upward force. Okay, so if we balance them, what we can write, the upward force is Pg into A. So all these 3 forces are balanced by the gas pressure, which is Pg into A, and that will be equal to the summation of 3 downward forces. One is P atmosphere into A plus F spring, force due to spring, plus the weight of the piston, mg. So if you divide it by the area, what we get is Pg equal to P atmosphere plus F spring plus mg whole divided by the area of the piston. Okay, so after that it's just substituting the numbers, because this force due to piston is given, mass is given, density, acceleration due to gravity we know, area is also given, which is 35 centimeters squared, and atmospheric pressure we know, so we can directly find out the gas pressure. Let's see what are the values we are going to use. Okay, so again we have just plotted, just input the numbers that are given, which is atmospheric pressure is 95 kPa plus force due to spring is 150 Newton, and the weight is the 3.2 kg is the mass, and 9.81 meter per second square is the acceleration due to gravity, g. So this is the total force divided by the area. Here you note that to be consistent in the unit system, we have converted the centimeter squared to meter squared by multiplying it with 10 to the power minus 4. So 35 centimeter square is 35 into 10 to the power minus 4 meter square. Okay, again here I have written all the units, individual units. Okay, so here 95 kPa, and this part is consistently you will get Newton per meter square, which is Pascal. Okay, and that will come out to be 52,000. So here you see that unless you write this kPa here, okay, there is a mistake you can, I mean a possible mistake you can make here is by adding 95 plus 52,000. Okay, that's a possible mistake. But as I have written kPa and I continue that everywhere I write it, so I can directly see that these two cannot be summed up as is. We have to convert it to first kPa and then we can sum it up. So this is 95 kPa plus 52 kPa. This is 147 kPa. Okay, so this is the point I have written here as well, which we will consistently follow throughout this tutorial series, that always please write the individual units to avoid any error, and also that will ensure that you will be given part marking. Okay, without unit, a number is, it does not mean anything to a scientist, to an engineer. It does not mean anything. So please write the individual units. That will help you identify the errors due to unit mismatch and all. If you miss something, that will be identified just from the unit. Okay, so again, that was a straightforward problem on the concept of pressure, okay, and force balance. Now let's take the next problem, which will be using the concept of Pascal law. Pascal law you have learned in your school days, I suppose. Okay, so what we are doing here, we are trying to design a hydraulic lift. Okay, this you have seen somewhere in this car repair shop or somewhere, wherever you have a heavy object to lift, but you want to use, I mean, much less force compared to its weight. Okay, that is the concept of hydraulic lift that we are going to see here. So the problem statement is, a hydraulic lift is to be used to lift a 2500 kg weight. Okay, let's say that is a car or whatever. So that's 2500 kg weight by putting a weight of 25 kg only. Okay, that means 1/100th of weight we are putting to lift a weight on a piston with a diameter of 10 centimeters. So where you are putting the weight 25 kg, that piston is having 10 centimeter diameter. Okay, on the other hand, we are placing this 2500 kg weight which we want to raise, and the diameter, what would be the diameter that will actually make this 25 kg weight balance a 2500 kg weight on the other side of the fluid body. Okay, that's the concept of hydraulic lift. And what we require to solve this problem, so we require here is the concept of Pascal's law. Okay, Pascal's law, what does it tell? It tells us that for an incompressible confined fluid, change in pressure is transmitted equally everywhere. Okay, so at one portion of the fluid, if you increase the pressure a little bit, the same pressure will be transmitted to the other side of the fluid. Everywhere that pressure will be transmitted. So that's the concept of Pascal's law. So here, if we do the schematic of this hydraulic lift in terms of weight, actually in terms of force and area, so we can see Pascal's law tells us that at point 1 on your left hand side and point 2 on your right hand side, both the places will have the same pressure, P1 and P2. Okay, that means the force divided by area will be the same. F1 by A1 will be equal to F2 by A2. So that gives us that A2 will be F2 by F1 multiplied by A1. Now you can see that these are cylindrical pistons. So A2 will be pi d2 squared by 4. Okay, and A1 will be pi d1 squared by 4. And F2 by F1, F2 is nothing but the weight of the 2500 kg mass. So that means 2500 into G. And F1 is nothing but the weight of the left hand side weight, that is 25 kg into G. Okay, so all these values are given. So you can see directly that D2, this pi by 4 cancels out, 25 also cancels out. Ultimately what you get is d2 squared is equal to 100 into d1 squared. That means d2 equal to d1 into 10, and d1 is given 10 centimeter multiplied by 10. Okay, so that gives you 1 meter. So you can see, to raise the much larger weight, what you have to do, you have to use a much larger area, but not as large, because it was 100 times larger compared to the weight, but here you are only having 10 times. That means square root of that 100 in the diameter. Okay, so that gives us another concept, Pascal's law, which is related to the pressure. Next, we'll take another problem which will be on the concept of energy. So this is from the chapter number 2. If we can see this chapter constitution of the book by Cengel and Bowles, we have looked at few problems from chapter 1. Now we are going to look at few problems from chapter 2, which talks about energy, energy transfer, and general energy analysis. Okay, so this is the problem from this chapter we will take up few problems. Okay, so let's take this problem 4. Let me zoom this out a little bit. Okay, so what this problem is asking us to do: consider a river flowing towards a lake at an average velocity of 3 meter per second at a rate of 500 meter cube per second. So this is meter cube per second, that means the volume flow rate, and 3 meter per second is the velocity, and this is at a location which is 90 meter above the lake surface. Okay, determine the total mechanical energy of the river water per unit mass. Okay, per unit mass flow rate, what is the total mechanical energy and the power generation potential of the entire river at that location? That's the question. So if you see this, a river is flowing from your left hand side, okay, at certain height, and then it falls by about 90 meter to reach the surface of the lake. Okay, and lake, you can see, you can take that as the bottom level beyond which it does not go, and lake is big enough so that the level does not change. And at the point of just falling there, the velocity is 3 meter per second and the volume flow rate is 500 meter cube per second. Okay, this is the problem statement. So let's try to solve this. And to solve this, what is required is the concept of conservation of energy. Okay, so a velocity of flow provides kinetic energy. Okay, whenever you have a velocity, you have a kinetic energy, and whenever you have a height difference, we have a potential energy that can be exploited. Okay, so that's how all these hydraulic turbines and all, they work by exploiting the potential energy. Okay, so both this kinetic energy and potential energy are forms of mechanical energy. We call it mechanical energy, both the kinetic and potential energy. And it is also asking us to find out what would be the total work potential. Okay, so the total work potential will be nothing but the total mechanical energy of the river flow. Okay, so here, what is the total mechanical energy? That will be potential energy plus kinetic energy. Potential energy comes from the height difference, so that will be mass flow rate into G into H. H is the height difference, G is the acceleration due to gravity, and m dot is the mass flow rate. and the kinetic energy will be m dot into velocity squared by 2, half mv square. That's the kinetic energy. Okay, so here we can see m dot you can take out, and that will be nothing but rho into v dot, right? That is the volume flow rate into density of water. That would be the mass flow rate, and inside the parenthesis we will have gh for the potential energy part, and plus v2 squared by 2, that will be for the kinetic energy part. Okay, so let me zoom this out a little bit. Yes. Okay, so now everything is given. Again we write each and every term along with its full unit. That means in this case the unit of the density of water is kg per meter cube. This is 1000 kg per meter cube into the volume flow rate is 500 meter cube per second. Okay, and in the parenthesis we have the gh, that is 9.81 meter per second square, into h is 90 meter. That's the height difference between the river surface and the lake surface. Okay, that's 90 meter, plus we have this kinetic energy term, which is 3 meters per second whole square divided by 2. Okay, so again you see these are all SI units consistent with each other. So what you get is the unit of power. Okay, so that's 4.44 into 10 to the power 8 watt. What is the SI unit of power? And you can convert it into a more manageable number by converting it into megawatt. That means 10 to the power 6 watt. This will be 444 megawatt. Okay, as there is no loss considered here, the total work potential will be 444 megawatt. Okay, so that's the another problem we have looked at, where our concept of energy or the conservation of energy, the potential and kinetic energy like exchange of potential kinetic energy into total mechanical energy and work potential. Those concepts we have used, and we have solved this problem. Okay, thank you. Next, we are going to take another problem, but this time we are not. Okay, we are going to take the next problem, which is a conceptual problem, not a numerical problem. Okay, here we are trying to understand how the definition of system or the system boundary, how does it change the heat, work, and other interactions. Okay, so what is the problem statement? Let us look at that first. Okay, so it asks you about consider a household refrigerator located in a room. Determine the work and heat interactions when the following one taken as the system. Okay, now you are defining your system and you have to see how the interactions will change based on your definition of system. First case is the content of the refrigerator is the system. That means the food items, milk and other things that you have inside the refrigerator, that's your system. Okay, the second case is that all parts of the refrigerator including the content, so the whole refrigerator is your system now, which all of course contains all its content. Okay, the third case, case C, is everything contained within the room in which the refrigerator is kept. So the room is the system. So schematically what you can see here, that content is the smallest part. If you take the system, that's possible. Now refrigerator, that actually it contains the whole of the content. So that's also in the second case, that's the system. And the room which contains the refrigerator, that's the third case, where we are defining our system to be the room. Now you have to find out what are the work and heat interactions for each of these cases. Okay, so basically it's a conceptual problem, not a numerical problem. Okay, let's see how to understand this. Okay, so now let's see what we require. Here we require the concept of thermodynamic system and its boundaries that you have learned, I assume, and let's see whether we can solve this problem. So first case is when the content of the refrigerator is your system. Okay, here it is only the heat interactions that are there. Okay, because the content is not exposed to anything else other than heat. You keep like a bottle of milk there, and either heat is added to that or heat is extracted to that. No work is performed on the content. So only heat interactions it undergoes. Now the first one, the heat is added from the room, because suppose if you switch off the refrigerator, the thing will be heated up to the room temperature. Okay, so heat is constantly getting added from the room, and whatever the refrigerator system is doing is extracting that heat. Okay, the second heat interaction is heat is removed by the refrigeration system. Okay, so ideally at equilibrium both these rates are equal, so that the content is maintained at a specified low temperature. Suppose you want to keep it at 5 degrees centigrade, the can of milk. So at that equilibrium, whatever heat is getting added from the room and whatever heat is getting extracted by the refrigerator, both of them match, and that's why the temperature is maintained. Okay, so again, so when the content is the system, it is only the heat interaction, and either heat is getting added from the room or it is getting removed by the refrigeration system. Okay, now let's see the next case where we are considering the refrigerator as a whole is our system. So here both work and heat are actually interacting with the system. Heat, how? Heat is gained from the room, right? As well as the second heat interaction is heat is lost from the condenser of the refrigeration system. Have you ever looked at the back side of your refrigerator, household refrigerator? You have a wire frame like structure, which if you touch it by hand, you will feel that it is hotter than the room temperature, because it is getting the heat that getting extracted from the content of the refrigerator to the atmosphere or to the ambient. Okay, so that is why heat is lost from the condenser, and that's the condenser part. So these are two heat interactions it has, and the extra thing that is not directly interacting with the content is the work. Okay, work, that means the electrical work in the form of compressor work. Okay, and that is what is interacting with the refrigerator. So when the refrigerator is our system, we have two heat interactions. One is with the room, another one is heat rejected from the condenser, and the third one is the electrical work in the form of compressor, work. Okay, so now you see, when we take the content, it is only the heat interactions. Now when we take the refrigerator, we have a work interaction as well, and that is electrical work. Now if we take a superset of that, so the whole room is our system, and where the refrigerator is kept, and we want to know what is the heat or work interaction with the room. So if we look there, heat is lost to the outside. Okay, so outside, because refrigerator, what it is doing, it is always getting some heat into the room, right? It is increasing the heat content of the room. So heat is, and that heat is lost to the atmosphere, which is outside through the window and doors. So that heat is lost from the room to the atmosphere. That's the heat interaction. And the electrical work, that is coming through the supply line. So the electrical plug that you are plugging your refrigerator to is fed by some supply line which is coming out of the room, right? So that is the electrical work entry point for the system here. Okay, so here we see that how we look at, or how we define the boundary of a system, that tells us what would be included in the system and what would be the interactions. And it is very important to understand this concept so that you can apply the first law of thermodynamics, or actually anything, any knowledge on thermodynamics properly, if you define the system correctly. Okay, so let's look at the next problem, okay, which is again on conservation of energy, and we'll look at the conservation of mechanical energy. Okay, so if we zoom into the problem statement, yes, so the problem statement is, determine the power required for a certain mass car. Okay, a car, the mass is given, to climb a uphill road, the length of which is given, with a slope of 30 degree in 12 seconds. So if we directly look at the schematic picture for this problem, that we have a car which is going from the bottom to the up through a straight uphill road, and the inclination of that uphill road with the horizontal is given. The length of that road is also given, and in the statement it is also given that what is the mass of that car and how much time does it take to cover that 100-meter stretch in the uphill road. Okay, now we are considering three cases here. One, if the whole thing happens at a constant velocity. Okay, so the uphill movement happens, but the velocity does not change anywhere. And the case B, when the car starts from rest at the bottom point of the uphill road, and the final velocity is 30 meters per second. Okay, when it reaches at the top, that's the case B. And case C, it asks us to consider when the speed comes down from 30 meters per second to a final velocity of 5 meters per second. Okay, so basically one is at constant velocity, the second one is when the car is accelerating against the gravity, and the third one is when the car is decelerating. Okay, and in all these cases what we need to find out is the power required. Fine. So here also it tells us that you can disregard friction, air drag, or rolling resistance. Okay, so these things you can neglect. That's the problem statement. So let's see how we can solve this and what concept we need here. Okay, so what is required? First thing, it asks for power. So power is, the definition of power is rate of change of energy, right? So we can say delta E, which is change of energy divided by the time, delta T. Okay, here we see that it either goes up or down. So that means you have some potential energy change, which is due to height, and it also changes its velocity. So you have change in kinetic energy as well. Okay, so there are two forms of energy change here, potential energy and kinetic energy, and both of them we call the mechanical energy, forms of mechanical energy. Okay, so this is the basic concept that we are going to need to solve this problem. Now let's take the first case, case 1, where the velocity is somehow kept constant. Okay, so if the velocity does not change, then you can say that there will be no change in kinetic energy. Only the potential energy will be changed because you have a change in height. Okay, so just by using the definition of power, we can write that it will be equal to delta of potential energy, that means change in potential energy divided by the time. Okay, so potential energy change, we know it is measured through mass into acceleration due to gravity g into the change in height h, mgh divided by delta t. So only trick you have to use here is how to find h. H will be your length of the road. Let's see the schematic picture again. Length of the road into sine of the inclination angle. Okay, so if we look at the road here, so this length is given to be 100 meters and this angle is 30 degree. So the change of height, this is the height. Okay, please follow the mouse here. So this is the height, which is length L sine 30, right? Sine 30 degree. So that's what we are going to use here. Okay, so basically in place of h, we have written L sine 30. So mg L sine 30 divided by t. Now everything is given. Mass is given to be 1150 kg multiplied by the acceleration due to gravity, which is 9.81 meter per second square. And then L is given 100 meter and this is sine 30 degree. And the time delta t is given to be 12 seconds. Okay, so if you everything is in SI unit, so the value you'll get that of power, and that is the unit of watt. So this is 47,000 watt, and in more manageable form you can write 47 kilowatt. Okay, so this is the case where there is no change in velocity, only change in potential energy. Okay, so that's the case 1. Now let's take the next case where we have kinetic energy change as well, because we have now change in velocity. So what is the second case? It is from rest to 30 meter per second. So now the kinetic energy part is non-zero, okay, as delta V is non-zero. And the potential energy change will be the same because the height change does not change. The change in height will be the same. So that means the potential energy part will be the same. So here we are not going to do the same potential energy change. We can only focus on what is the power required to accomplish the kinetic energy change, that is from raised to 30 meter per second. So what would be the change? That would be half mv square. So here the delta of that kinetic energy will be v2 square minus v1 square, right? So half m v2 square minus v1 square divided by delta t. Again, everything is given here. The mass is 1150 kg and the v2 is 30 meter per second. Okay, 30 square minus 0 square, that means it starts from rest, and the unit will be meter square per second square and divided by 12 seconds. Okay, that's the time period. So if you do this calculation, you will find it will be 43100 watt, and convert it to kilowatt to be 43.1 kilowatt. Okay, so this is the total power to accomplish the change in kinetic energy in 12 seconds. So on top of this, we have the potential energy change as well. So the total power that we will get is the kinetic energy change by delta t and the potential energy change by delta t. So the second part we are having it from case 1, okay, which is 47 kilowatt. So now we are simply adding them up and we are getting 90.1 kilowatt. So that would be the total power required to accomplish the change in height. I mean, the whole uphill road will be covered, but the velocity will be from 0 to 30 meter per second. Okay, so this is the case B, where we have both the kinetic energy change as well as the potential energy change. Now let's look at the third case. Okay, so in the third case, what we have similar, but now instead of acceleration we have deceleration from 35 meter per second to 5 meter per second. Okay, similar method we are going to use. So at the bottom of the hill, the car has 35 meter per second velocity, and when it reaches the top, that means at the end of the 100 meter stretch of the uphill road, it will have 5 meter per second velocity. So the method will be similar, and the power due to kinetic energy will be now half m v2 square minus v1 square. But in the next line, you see v2 is now less, so that is 5 meter per second square whole square minus v1 is 30. Okay, and the rest is the same. Your mass is 1150 kg and the time is 12 seconds. Okay, so if you do that calculation, you will see that you will have a negative value because the velocity is decreasing. That means the power required for kinetic energy change will be negative, that is minus 57.5 kilowatt. So this negative sign is important, and when you do the total power calculation, again the potential energy change part is not getting affected, so it will have positive 47 kilowatt, but this kinetic energy part is now contributing negative 57.5 kilowatt. So if you sum them up, you will get a net negative 10.5 kilowatt. Okay, so you note this negative sign. What does it mean? It just means that power is lost due to the process of braking, because you have to brake, right? You have to brake to bring the velocity down from 35 meter per second to 5 meter per second, and so that the effective power that getting lost through braking as heat, it will be lost, that is your 10.5 kilowatt. So again, we have looked at another problem, which is the conversion between potential and kinetic energy when a car goes uphill at different velocity conditions. We have looked at 3 cases, and all these problems that we have looked at in this tutorial, it focuses on the concept of pressure, density and all, and then the concept of conservation of energy, basically the first law of thermodynamics. Okay, please go through the concepts again, and if you want to relook at this video, that will be more easier, and if you had the concepts cleared, you could follow the tutorial, I hope. And with that, I finish this tutorial, the first one now. Thank you so much.